Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my May 2022 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if there's anything you need to skip over or to revisit, use that feature down below. On the way down to that, make sure that you are subscribed and make sure you hit the bell icon so you know when I upload videos. In May, I read 12 books for a total of 4,633 pages, which is the least amount of books I've read in a month since I started doing my monthly wrap-ups, because cross-stitching is a new hobby of mine that has taken over my life. I only picked this hobby back up in April, and so far I've done a lot of different little projects, and I'm currently working on one that is almost 22,000 stitches and it's book themed, so I'm excited to share that when it's eventually finished. That page count takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,923 of those pages were actually about 86 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 10 adult books and 2 YA books. Everything I read this month was a novel, which makes this graphic look hysterically sad. This month, most of what I read was mystery, thriller, and contemporary, followed by historical fiction, horror, science fiction, and science fantasy. If you adjust by page count, you realize that the horror was shorter than the average. More than half of these books were from the library, but I also read some books from publishers, NetGalley, one I borrowed from a friend years ago, and one was a birthday gift. I read 7 audiobooks, 3 paperbacks, and 2 ebooks. The biggest chunk of my books were in the 300 to 399 pages range, and everything was published in the last couple of decades. The majority of these books were written by female authors, and the majority of the protagonists were also female. In terms of setting, half were set in the USA, 4 were set in the UK, and 2 were set in other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, there were queer books, books about race, mental health, feminist books, a combination of some of the above, but a big chunk didn't fall into any of these categories. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 3-star read, 2 3.5-star reads, 6 4-star reads, 2 4.5-star reads, and 1 5-star read. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 3-star book this month was Dawn of the Dead. This is the start of the Pepper Martin series, and it takes place mostly in a graveyard. You see, Pepper used to have it all. She had a fiancé, her parents were wealthy, she was wealthy, she had a degree, but she didn't really ever have to work for a living, and then suddenly all of that fell apart and she found herself running tours in a cemetery. A few days after she has an accident that lands her in the ER, she is giving a tour when all of a sudden this mafia don is in the background of her tour group heckling her. The biggest problem about this is he's been dead for 30 years. Now he wants her to solve his murder. This was a fun mystery. I liked going along with Pepper as she kind of figured things out. However, this book was published in 2006 and you can tell. Additionally, this is a book that has mentioned the main character's boobs more times than any other book I think I've ever read, and it's written by a woman, which is super weird because usually she-boobed boobly writing is a guy thing, but no, we're equal opportunity here. It's so bad that you even learn her bra size on the very first page. And it's not because she's like at a bra fitting or she's bra shopping or anything, it's just casually mentioned. Additionally, anytime she meets a man in this book, they obviously have to ogle the twins, which is just super annoying to write. I don't care about that. I want you to solve this mystery. I don't give a crap about your rack. Outside of that and a couple of lines that didn't age well and I didn't particularly enjoy, this was kind of fun, and if I had access to the rest of the series, I would probably read it. But this was a discarded library book that I actually borrowed from a friend years ago, meaning to read it because she knew it was hot garbage that I would enjoy, and she was correct. But we don't have the rest of the series, so I don't think it's going to happen. On to my 3.5-star books, the first one being Primal Animals. This is a book I actually did an entire reading vlog for because I was on the blog tour when it came out a couple of weeks ago. That means I'm going to link that video down below. This was my horror book of the month, and this one is a sapphic book about this girl that goes to a summer camp, and everything is kind of weird and creepy. However, the one bright part of her day is the girl that sleeps in the bunk above her is pretty darn cute. As we know from the synopsis, she's soon tapped to maybe join a secret society, and it's her trying to figure out if she should do that. There's also a mixture of unease that comes from the fact that she is deathly afraid of bugs, and she's living in a summer camp for the entire summer, so don't know how she thought that was going to work out, but she has quite a few panic attacks because of that. Additionally, everyone treats her really weird because they know that her mom went to this summer camp more than 20 years ago, which is just super weird to me. Like, why would you care whose mom came here? But apparently she has a little bit of a reputation that our main character knows nothing about. This was atmospheric with an interesting premise, and I was very intrigued by how this one ended. My other 3.5-star book this month was The Truth About Melody Browne by Lisa Jewell. This is, I believe, the third of her books that I've read so far, and this is the second I read this month, the other one being higher rated, so we'll learn about that later. This book is about a woman who is a single mom. She's about my age, so in her mid-30s, and when she was 9 years old, she was in a house fire, and she doesn't really remember anything before that. However, one day she decides to go on a first date with this guy who has tickets to a hypnotist, and something that happens while she's on stage kind of breaks her brain a little bit, and she starts getting these memories and doesn't know if they are accurate or not. So she has to kind of sleuth her way around to figure out if these are real memories and who she actually is. Overall, I really enjoy this because we got to see what was happening in her present as well as flashbacks to the past as she kind of got these memories and trying to figure out how they fit together, and I really enjoyed that. But I think because I've read a couple of other of her books that have come out more recently, they've had more twists and turns and more dark things in them, so I was expecting this one to be a little bit more like that, and it's fine that it wasn't. I just think for my enjoyment and because of my own expectations, this one just wasn't my favorite that I've read by her, but I still definitely enjoyed it. Something to be aware of going into this book is in her past there is a whole plot line about children and whether or not they live after being born and all of those types of things, so if you have any triggers around pregnancy or child death, I would definitely look into that further before going into this book. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being Sons of Fortune by Jeffery Archer. I've never read anything by this author previous to this, but I read this as part of the 12 challenge, so somebody on Twitter picked this for me to read, and I went, yes, sure, why not? I didn't even know what it was about going into it. However, this book starts out telling you the backstory and the relationships of these two different couples, both who are trying to have children around the same time. One of the couples goes to the hospital and she delivers healthy twins. The other couple goes to the hospital and she delivers one baby, but he's very sickly and he ends up dying. Her nanny, knowing they've had infertility issues in the past and knowing that she's not going to have a job if there is no child, decides to swap out the deceased child for one of the twins. We then watch these twins grow up and the things that are very parallel in their lives, the things that are not so parallel in their lives. By the end of the book, these twins are 43 years old, so this does span over quite a few decades. Overall, I found this really interesting, and I spent a lot of time wondering if they were ever going to cross paths. There were a couple of times where they sort of were in the same room but didn't really cross paths, until a legal case that happens later on where they definitely do cross paths. One of the things that I found interesting about this is they both had a mutual villain in their lives, and that's kind of the reason why they ended up crossing paths, which I thought was interesting. However, if you're not into a book that lasts decades upon decades upon decades, this probably won't be your thing. Next we have Gilded by Marissa Meyer. Going into this, I didn't realize it's the first in a series, so definitely know that going in, because you think it's going to be wrapped up at the end of this 16-hour audiobook, and then it's not, so just know that going in. This is a reimagining of the Rumpelstiltskin tale, so the whole spinning straw into gold phenomenon and somebody helping somebody with that. This really fleshed out that tale, and it's not a direct reimagining as you would probably have heard the story before, but it has all of these elements and other elements that build on top of it, and I found that really fascinating. I really wanted to know more about this fantasy world, which means it's a good thing that there's going to be another book. However, I just really wanted to know how it was going to end, and then, you know, slight cliffhanger. Not so much that you're going to be super angry, but if you don't know going into this that you're not going to get the whole story, it's going to feel a little bit abrupt because you want to know what's going to happen. Next we have The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which is a little bit of an interesting book to try to talk about. We start out with this main character named Tukey, and when she is younger she is convicted of the crime of moving a body across state lines that happen to have drugs on the body. She didn't know there were drugs on the body, she just thought like this person should be buried by this other person, somebody talked her into moving the body, and those people actually stored the drugs on there because that's how they were shipping the drugs. But she took the fall for it. She was in jail a few years before it came to light that these people had done this, and she got out of jail. Now in the present she's working in an Indigenous-owned bookstore, and she has this person who comes in all the time who's like the person that she just can't stand sometimes because it's this white lady. She's very entitled, she's very into Indigenous things, but in like kind of a creepy fetishy type of way. So she's not completely heartbroken when this elder patron passes on. However, she is pretty heartbroken when the ghost of this person seems to be messing with her and only her at the bookshop. Now that in itself seems like it could be an entire book, but then you place on top of that things in this book happen in the year 2020, and what happened then happens in this book. It makes it feel like two very different books. There's also an extensive subplot about her stepdaughter and the man she ends up marrying and people that work with her at the store. Altogether, I really enjoyed it, but because we have these two very separate things, it did feel almost like two different books that had kind of been smushed together. Not in a terrible way, but it was just a little bit disjointed for me. Next, we have The Affair of the Mysterious Letter by Alexis Hall. I also read 2 Alexis Hall books this month. The other one got a higher rating, so we'll talk about it later. This is a book I picked up just purely based on the fact that Alexis Hall wrote it and there was an audiobook from my library. I didn't really spend too much time looking at the cover. I just went, this is probably going to be historical fiction. There's going to be a mystery. Why not? Let's get into it. It took me about a chapter and a half to realize that this is a reimagining of Sherlock Holmes, but in a fantasy world that looks very much like Victorian England, but with way more cool world building, and it's definitely not Victorian England. It does have a little bit of the feel of being set when the original Sherlock Holmes books were. However, it's also definitely a fantasy world with a lot of world building. Our narrator is John Wyndham, which is obviously our John Watson character, which makes a lot of sense given that was the narrator of the original Sherlock Holmes books. It took me that initial chapter and a half to figure out this was a retelling because the early chapters really focus on John's backstory and how he is trans and his father wasn't a big fan of him coming out, and he's originally from a different area, but he eventually went away to war, and because of magical war circumstances he came back with an injury, which means he walks with a cane, and then he's trying to find somebody to live with, and he ends up going to this flat that's at 221B, not Baker Street, a different street. I think it was I can't remember the name of the street, but as soon as I heard 221B, I was like, ha ha ha, Sherlock Holmes, blah blah blah. And then I was like, wait, walks with a cane, is meeting somebody who might be a roommate. This person fires off a gun as soon as he walks in the door. Yeah, okay, Sherlock Holmes retelling, I got you. He ends up living with this woman named Scheherazade Haas, who is a sorceress, and that is a whole big thing. This was honestly so much fun. The Irene Adler character is called Irene, and she shows up being like, I got this mysterious letter saying that if I don't tell my fiance all of the terrible things I've done in my life, then they are going to basically do that for me, and I don't want my fiance to know that I've previously been kind of a terrible person because she loves me and I don't want to get rid of that relationship, so can you help me figure out who is trying to blackmail me? They narrow it down to about 5 different people that could possibly be doing this. At least one of them is a vampire, and they go from there trying to figure out who could have sent the letter. It is definitely not a case that I cracked ahead of time. This was a lot of fun. They went to a lot of different locations, and it was just so fun the way it was written, especially because John will not write things like swears, because he's writing this in a serialized format, so it is going into a newspaper, much like the original tales, so he can't relay certain words that people use, but he'll quote people as saying things and then point out that those weren't the exact words they used and let the reader kind of figure out which swear words might have fit in there. I had no idea what to expect going into this, and I absolutely loved it. Earlier than the tradition dictates, my camera battery was running out, so if the angle's a little bit different, that's why. Next on this list we have Blacktop Wasteland. Now I had read one other book by this author before, which was Razorblade Tears, which I absolutely loved, so when I saw there was another audiobook by this author, I of course wanted to listen to it. This one is about a guy named Beauregard. His nickname is Bug, and he is actually the driver when people do heists. He doesn't do this super often anymore. It's something kind of from his past. He actually owns a mechanic shop, but when a new shop opens in town, he's kind of hurting financially, and somebody comes to him with one last score, and of course he has to try to take it. This was really cool because the author really loves cars, which is something he talks about in an interview at the end of the audiobook, and you can see that he took a lot of care and detail into talking about what you would need to do to get away from these certain situations and different interesting things and ways to do that, which I thought was awesome. And as we know, it's never one last heist. There's always something that kind of throws that off and ups the stakes and makes the situation that much more dangerous. What I really love about these authors' books is all of the characters seem really fleshed out and intriguing, and you want to know more about them, but not to the point where you're wondering why the book doesn't tell you. You just can tell that there's more details about this person that you just don't know because it has nothing to do with the story. Assuming there are more books published by this author, I will definitely be reading them in the future. The other Lisa Jewell book that I read this month is called The Family Upstairs. This one has 3 different people who are narrators. One of them is this woman who has just turned 25 years old and just got a letter from the solicitors. She knew growing up that she was adopted, but she didn't know the full story behind that, and when she turns 25, she actually inherits this mansion in this very rich part of London. Our only male narrator is somebody who is living 25 to 30 years previous to this and actually lives in that house. So we kind of get to find out what happened in that house leading up to it eventually being abandoned and then eventually going to that first character. And then the third character is a woman who is living in France with her 2 young children, and she desperately wants to get back to this house. And based on the fact that we know that this house used to contain a cult, and when this child, who was about 10 months old, was found in the house, the adults had done a ritual suicide and the children were nowhere to be found. So this woman finds out that not only does she inherit this house, she had 2 siblings and she wants to figure out what happened to them. Because we got these 3 very diverse points of view, this came together in such an intricate way with an extra little twist at the end, and I didn't realize it when I read it, but when I was doing up my notes for this, I actually realized that this is the first in what is going to be, I assume, a duology, because a second book is due to come out sometime this year. At least Goodreads thinks it maybe might coming out this year, so we'll see if and when that happens. And based on the way that it ends, I would love to read that book. On to my 4.5 star reads, the first one being an arc that came out on May 31st, and that is A Rip Through Time by Kelley Armstrong. This book is about a Canadian detective who is in Edinburgh, Scotland because her grandmother's health is failing, and then all of a sudden she finds herself 150 years back in time and has to figure out how to get home. The interesting thing about this is she is not in her own body. She's in the body of somebody else who was strangled in the same alleyway 150 years previous. So now she has to work in this body, kind of go to this person's day job and kind of try to figure out what is going on, because, you know, she can't really just tell people that she's from the future. That's gonna make sure you wind up in an asylum and then you're never gonna get home. I thought this was a really cool premise, and obviously it ticks a lot of boxes for me because Edinburgh is my favorite city in the entire world. I used to be a tour guide there. I feel like I've said this a million times on my channel, but that's because sometimes I read books set there because I miss it. I miss it a lot. I was actually supposed to go back, you know, in 2020 I was gonna go back, and then I could not for obvious reasons. This is also the first in a series, and I know it just came out, but I need the second book immediately, please. My other 4.5 star book was Queerly Beloved. This is about this woman who has 2 jobs. One of them is at a Christian-owned bakery, and by night she actually works at the local lesbian club. She is queer, and this is not something that she ever discusses at her day job because she knows that's not going to go over well with the preacher's wife who owns the bakery. One day when she's about to close up shop, this very, very attractive person who is new to town comes to the shop. They flirt a little bit, and she asks if that person would like a personal tour guide of the area because she's lived there all her life. These 2 women decide to go on a date, and everything is hunky-dory until all of a sudden somebody tells her boss that she's queer, which means that she no longer has a job and has to figure out some kind of side hustle. Strangely enough, around this time she actually goes to a family wedding, and there's something wrong that happens with the cake that she has to fix behind the scenes, and she's telling these other people at the wedding about it because they're the kind of people that she feels will really appreciate it, even though she's never met these people before. And the woman says, actually, I have a bridesmaid that just dropped out. Would you mind coming to my wedding, and if anything goes disastrous, you can just fix it? And at first she thinks this is kind of weird, but then they up the ante by saying, well, we were going to pay for this original person's hotel room, so instead of paying for that, why don't we just give you the $250? And she's like, wait a second, I can make money being a professional bridesmaid? Yes, please. This was wholesome and sapphic and had a lot to do with baking and being queer and being out and all of those types of things. And I just very, very much enjoyed it. I also believe it was set about a decade ago, so it's very interesting at the end of this book to kind of get the how the characters are doing now, because all of that was just absolutely lovely. I very much enjoyed it. My 5-star read this month was also something that had to do with baking and queer people, and that was Rosaline Palmer Takes the Cake. This is a book about a single mom who decides to go on a reality baking show called Bake Expectations, which looks a lot like a certain British show that has to do with baking. You can figure it out which show that is. And she decides to go on the show because her parents have always been very disappointed in her that she never became a doctor because she became a mother quite young in life. And she wants to win so she has the money to pay back the loan she's taken from them so they'll get off her back and she can prove that she actually is great at this hobby of hers and maybe, you know, turn it into a career. Because anyone who wins that show goes on to some form of success with it. On her way to the very first day of shooting this show, there's actually a problem with the trains, and one of the other contestants is in the same problem, so they end up sleeping somewhere kind of on the way and then show up first thing in the morning the next day, which means they're late and behind schedule and all of that type of stuff. But there's kind of a flirtation connection there, which makes her kind of lie about her background because she feels like she has kind of a boring background. That will obviously never come back to bite her in the butt. Oh wait, yes it does. What I really like about this book is we get to know about the other people who are also on this baking program, and obviously some of them were not people we're gonna particularly enjoy, some of them are people that we are, and some people, one in particular, she has kind of a judgment about that changes over time as she gets to know that person. Now there are certain things that happen in this book that I knew were gonna happen a mile away, and I knew that this certain thing was going to happen and I was going to be super mad about it, but the main character didn't see it happening. But nobody really goes into dating thinking that, you know, this person is going to be exactly the worst kind of person in exactly the way that bisexual people do not want their dates to be. I saw it coming though, and when it happened I was super angry, and rightfully so. Not at the book, at the person who did the thing. Which means that I should also mention a slight trigger warning for a sexual assault. It is very brief, it's not graphic on page, but one does occur. I just absolutely loved this, and then I absolutely loved when I found out at the end of the book that there is another book coming out in this series sometime this year, I think. So we're going to get to see other contestants on this same baking show, and I'm just so excited for it. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you're planning to read any of these books, or if you've read them, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!